The air in Ethelburg, Ohio, was thick enough to chew. It tasted of industrial smog, damp decay, and the pulverized brick of factories that had seen too many shutdowns. A pale, jaundiced haze smothered the sprawling city, smudging the afternoon sun into a wan, lifeless disk. It was hot, a humid, oppressive heat that clung to the skin and turned ballistic vests into personal saunas, making every breath a shallow labor. Officer Maya Rosales, a cop whose compact frame hid a steel-hard strength forged by loss and discipline, kept her eyes moving. She sat in the passenger seat of the lead armored truck in a 4-vehicle convoy. Her dark hair was in a tight, practical bun beneath her helmet, and her face, though young, was etched with the weary focus of a seasoned officer. Beside her, Rocco sat at alert. Her K-9 partner, a 90-pound shadow of sable German Shepherd fur, was an elite officer whose intelligent amber eyes scanned the rooftops and alleyways faster and more instinctively than any human could. Maya felt the familiar, uncomfortable prickle between her shoulder blades. It was the low, persistent hum of anxiety that a life in law enforcement created, the constant awareness that the ground beneath your feet could betray you. But today it felt different, sharper, more specific. She laid a gloved hand on Rocco's broad head. He leaned into the touch, a pleased rumble vibrating in his chest, but his ears remained pricked, swiveling. "Easy, boy," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the deep growl of the diesel engine. "Just another patrol. We check on the safe house. We go home. Simple." Rocco remained unconvinced. He shifted his weight, his claws ticking on the metal floor plate. He wasn't just her partner. He was her anchor. He was the only good thing to come out of the darkest period of her life. When her father, a decorated police captain for 30 years, died, not in the line of duty, but from a cruel, sudden stroke that stole him overnight, Maya's world had fractured. She had drifted, lost in a fog of grief so thick she could barely breathe. She'd joined the force in those days, seeking structure, discipline, anything to hold the broken pieces of her together. But it was the K-9 program that truly saved her. They had given her Rocco, then a boisterous, stubborn 2-year-old who refused to let her drown in sorrow. He was a force of nature, demanding interaction, forcing her to be present. He had licked away tears she didn't even realize she was shedding, nudging his head into her hand as she sat staring at a wall for hours. In his unwavering loyalty, in his simple, profound devotion, she had found a lifeline. He was the living, breathing link to the unconditional love she thought she had lost forever. He wasn't just a dog. He was her family. Which was why his anxiety now amplified her own. Rocco suddenly went rigid, pulling his head from under her hand. His black nose twitched, sampling the foul air. A low, almost silent whine vibrated deep in his chest. "What is it?" Maya whispered, her own body tensing. Officer Davis, the driver, glanced over. Davis was young, barely old enough to shave, his face still holding a softness this city hadn't yet completely eroded. "He smell something, Sergeant?" Davis asked, his own knuckles white on the armored steering wheel. "Whole city stinks. Probably just cooking fuel." "He's just antsy like me," Maya said, trying for a casualness she didn't feel, but her heart rate ticked up. Rocco never gave false alarms. She scanned the buildings ahead. They were approaching the turn. The Kilns, the cops called it. It wasn't its real name, but it had stuck. It was a narrow canyon of crumbling 3-story brick warehouses and shuttered storefronts. The buildings were so close you could almost reach out and touch both sides. It was a choke point, a death funnel, a perfect ambush location. Everybody knew it, but command, in its infinite wisdom, had insisted it was the fastest route for this witness check. "Dispatch, this is K-91, Maya said into her radio, her voice level and professional. "Entering the Kilns, maintain 50-foot spacing. Eyes up." The massive armored truck lumbered around the tight corner, its engine noise echoing off the close-set walls. The air grew thicker, the sunlight choked off by the looming buildings. The world became a narrow corridor of shadow and grit. Maya scanned the windows above. Empty. Black squares. Too empty. Rocco let out a single, strangled bark. It happened half a second later. The world vanished. There was no sound at first, just a flash of white and a silent, crushing pressure wave that drove the air from her lungs. The vehicle, weighing over 6 tons, was lifted off the ground. Time seemed to stretch in a nauseating slow-motion tableau of shrapnel, fire, and twisting metal. Maya realized with a strange sense of detachment that their truck was airborne. Then came the sound, a deafening, bone-jarring blast that felt like the sky was ripping apart. The truck slammed back to earth, not on its wheels but on its side with a horrendous shriek of metal and shattering glass. Silence. A high, thin, muffled ringing filled her ears. Then the screaming started. Pain. White-hot agony flared in her left shoulder. She was hanging sideways, held in place by her seatbelt. "Rocco!" She gasped, her voice a raw croak. She heard a pained yelp, then the frantic scrabbling of claws on metal. He was alive. He was behind her. The world erupted again. This wasn't one sound, but 1,000. The heavy, terrifying thump-thump-thump of a heavy machine gun from a rooftop, the incessant, sharp crack of rifles from a dozen windows, and the terrifying whoosh followed by an explosion as a grenade launcher hit the second truck in their convoy. Her senses were overloaded, her nostrils burning with the smell of cordite, burning rubber, and hot fuel. Thick, black smoke poured into the tilted cabin. She looked at Davis. He was slumped over the steering wheel, which was now pointed at the ground. His helmet was gone. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly through his light-colored hair. "Davis," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Davis, talk to me." He was limp, unresponsive. "We gotta get out. We gotta get out now," she yelled, mostly to herself. Training kicked in. She hit the quick release on her harness and dropped hard onto the passenger side door, which was now the floor. She ignored the searing pain in her shoulder and fumbled for Davis's release. The cabin was getting unbearably hot. Fire. The engine block was burning. "Davis, wake up. Come on, officer," she screamed, grabbing his vest and pulling. He was a dead weight, impossibly heavy. She heard Rocco barking, a sound of pure protective fury. He was somewhere in the back of the mangled cabin. She gave Davis one last, desperate tug, but he was pinned by the crushed dashboard. Another grenade hit their vehicle. This impact was different. It didn't just rock the truck, it rolled it. The truck groaned, metal screeching on concrete as the force of the blast flipped it completely onto its roof. Maya was thrown violently, her helmet cracking hard against the radio mount. The world spun in a dizzying vortex of black, then resolved back into a smoke-filled nightmare. She was upside down, trapped, pinned. The exits were blocked by fire and twisted metal. The screams of the other officers outside, the ones who had made it out of the other trucks, were fading, being replaced by triumphant shouts from enemy fighters. They were closing in. This was it. This was the end. Trapped in a burning box. Then, through the deafening ringing, she heard it, loud, ferocious, and unbroken. Rocco, pinned somewhere near her feet, wounded, but alive, was barking at the approaching shadows, a sound of pure, defiant rage that refused to be extinguished. A mile away and 1,000 feet above the city's labyrinth and chaos, former Navy SEAL Jack Callahan, callsign Ghost, lay perfectly still. His world was the inverse of Maya's, where she was trapped in smoke, fire, and noise. He was surrounded by open space and the profound silence of high altitude. He was in a sniper's hide, a small concrete ledge near the top of an unfinished high-rise. From here, the city of Ethelberg spread out in the hazy sun, looking almost peaceful, like a map. Jack was a man built for this kind of patience. His frame was lean and hard, his movements economical, and his eyes, a sharp, pale blue, held a stillness that came from staring through a scope for days on end, waiting for a single, perfect moment. Beside him was Petty Officer Cody Evans, callsign Echo. Evans was his spotter, a younger man whose expertise wasn't the rifle, but wind charts, data streams, and encrypted signals. He was the technical brain, Jack the instinctive trigger. They weren't watching the patrol route. Their mission, designated top priority by a joint federal task force, was focused on a nondescript warehouse 3 blocks to the north, where a high-value cartel leader was scheduled to meet his distributors. The first explosion wasn't a sound. It was a tremor, a low-frequency vibration that Jack felt in his chest and through the concrete he was lying on. Echo flinched, pulling his eye from his own spotting scope. What the hell was that? Felt big. Jack didn't move, his eye still glued to his scope. "Too far east," he said, his voice flat. "Not our sector." But his left hand, acting on instinct, moved to the small transceiver on his vest. He had 2 channels active. Channel A, the encrypted federal TACnet, was silent, professional. Channel B was dialed to the Ethelberg PD emergency frequency for situational awareness. He turned up the volume on B. It exploded. It wasn't a radio channel. It was a recording of pure chaos. Static overlaid with screams, the high-pitched zep of incoming rounds, and the panicked, broken shouts of men taking heavy fire. "Ambush! Ambush! In the kilns! We're pinned down. K9-1 is hit. Vehicle disabled. They're everywhere. We need. I'm hit." Jack's heart, normally a steady, metronomic beat, hammered against his ribs. The kilns. He knew her patrol route. He'd looked at it this morning, tracing the red line on the map, feeling the familiar prickle of anxiety he always felt when she was out on the streets. Ghost, Echo, this is Watchdog. The voice on Channel A cut through the noise in his other ear. It was Sack Grant, their task force commander. Grant was a man whose reputation was carved from granite. He was brilliant, demanding, and saw the world in terms of mission objectives, not people. That explosion was a police convoy. It's their problem. A SWAT team is spinning up, but they're 20 minutes out. You will maintain focus on the target building. I will not have this HVT slip away over a distraction. Acknowledged? Acknowledged, Watchdog, Jack replied, his voice betraying nothing. He stared at the target warehouse. A light was on in a third-floor window. The mission was on, but his attention was fractured, split between two frequencies. Channel A was his duty. Channel B was his life. He tried to filter out the panic on the police net, to listen for tactical information, but all he could hear was suffering. Then he heard her. It wasn't a scream. It was a report, strained, but professional, cutting through the noise with practiced authority. This is K-92. Team lead is down. We have multiple casualties. We are pinned, taking heavy fire from the rooftops. I can't. Her voice faltered for just a second. Maya, Jack whispered. The word was snatched away by the high-altitude wind. His professional detachment, the wall he built around himself, didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The sound of her voice, choked with fear, threw him back 6 months, to a sunny afternoon at the State Police K-9 Training Academy. It was the first time he'd gone to see her at the training grounds. He had been skeptical of the connection, the way the handlers talked about their dogs. To him, they were tools, like his rifle. Then he saw her work with Rocco. He watched her run the obstacle course, shouting commands, and the huge shepherd moved with a fluid, joyful obedience that was less about training and more about a deep, unspoken partnership. Afterward, she was sitting on the grass, and Rocco had his huge head in her lap, his amber eyes fixed on her face with an expression of pure, uncomplicated adoration. Jack sat nearby, feeling awkward in his civilian clothes. He was a man comfortable in the deadly silence of an overwatch position, not the relaxed vulnerability of a sunlit park. That's some piece of equipment, Jack had said, nodding toward the dog. Maya had smiled, stroking Rocco's ears. He's my rock. After my dad died, I was lost. Rocco, he doesn't care about the past. He's just here. He's the most loyal soul I've ever known. She looked up at Jack, her gaze serious. He keeps me steady. He keeps me safe. Jack, a man who dealt in risk, not emotion, found himself making a promise he hadn't intended. He reached out, letting Rocco sniff his hand. The dog appraised him for a moment, then gave his fingers a single, accepting lick. I'll keep you safe, Maya, Jack said, his voice husky. It's what I do. I'll watch over you, both of you. I promise. That promise felt like lead in his stomach now, listening to the war unfolding in his ear. Watchdog, he said, his own voice tight. That convoy is being overrun. 20 minutes is too long. They're going to be massacred. Sack Grant's voice came back, cold and sharp. Your observation is noted. Do not compromise the primary objective. SWAT will handle the police. That is final. Jack closed his eyes. He saw the target building. He saw the HVT who could end this phase of the drug war. And then, on Channel B, he heard Maya's voice again. This time, the professionalism was gone. It was shattered. It was a sound he would never forget. A raw, ragged cry of agony that tore straight through his soul. Rocco's hit. Oh, God, Rocco. No. No. He's been shot. He's bleeding out. He jumped in front of. Oh, God. I need help. Somebody, please. He's bleeding out. That was it. The HVT, the mission, the orders, they all evaporated. The promise he had made on that sunny field was the only reality that mattered. Sack Grant was giving orders to Ghost, the SEAL sniper. But it was Jack who had made a promise to Maya. Echo looked at him, his face pale. He'd heard it too. Ghost, Jack, what are you doing? Jack was already moving, pulling out his data charts, calculating windage and trajectory, not for the HVT, but for a cluster of rooftops a mile to the east. It's not your problem, Ghost. Grant's voice echoed in his ear. Jack reached up and switched off Channel A, silencing his commander. He was alone now with the sound of Maya's grief and the desperate, fading barks of her partner. Give me a firing solution for the kilns, Jack said to Echo, his voice dangerously low and calm. Right now, petty officer. Cody Echo Evans stared at his partner. Jack's face, usually a mask of calm, was now carved from stone. Jack, Ghost, you can't, Evans whispered, his voice thin against the wind. Grant will have your badge. That HVT is the whole mission. We abandon this position and he walks. Years of intel down the drain. Jack didn't look at him. His focus was absolute. His hands moved with a practiced, efficient grace. Echo, for the record, Jack said, his voice a low, cold, indisputable monotone. My primary comms just went down. Must be interference from the IDE blast. I'm unable to reach Watchdog. He reached for the heavy jack connecting his headset to the long-range TACnet and pulled it free. The physical act was small, but it was a definitive, career-ending choice. The only sound in his ear now was the Ethelberg PD emergency frequency, Channel B. It was a soundtrack of despair. I'm moving to establish a new Overwatch position, Jack continued, his voice devoid of emotion. This one's been compromised. Compromised by what? Evans pleaded, knowing the lie for what it was. Jack, think. I am thinking, Jack said. He was expertly breaking down his M110 sniper rifle, folding the stock and securing the scope. I'm thinking SWAT is 20 minutes out. In an ambush like that, 20 minutes is 20 lifetimes. They don't have 20 minutes. She doesn't have 20 minutes. He packed the rifle components into his drag bag with silent, practiced motions. Echo watched, his heart sinking. He was witnessing the suicide of a brilliant career. You go down there, you're not a SEAL anymore. You're just a guy with a rifle. You'll be alone. Grant will hang you out to dry. Jack zipped the bag. He slung it over one shoulder and picked up his carbine for the journey. He finally turned to look at his spotter, his blue eyes clear and cold, but with a flicker of something deeply human inside. Report what you saw, Cody. My comms failed. I moved to re-establish. He gave his partner the only plausible deniability he could. Now, are you going to give me a firing solution, or am I going in blind? Echo swallowed, defeated by the unshakable certainty in Jack's face. He turned back to his spotting scope, his hands shaking slightly as he began punching new data into his tablet. Find the construction site, the unfinished tower at bearing 095. It's the only elevation. Roger, Jack said. He didn't say, thank you. He didn't say goodbye. He just turned, slipped over the edge of the parapet and onto a narrow service ladder, and disappeared from view. The journey was a kilometer of urban hell. He moved across rooftops, the afternoon sun beating down on him, the heat radiating in waves from tar and concrete. He was a ghost in the haze, moving fast, his lungs burning. With every jarring step, every leap across a gap between buildings, the present fight faded, and his mind, as it always did under extreme pressure, sought refuge in the past. The gunfire receded, replaced by the memory of sea air and the barking of dogs. It was 9 months ago, at a joint training exercise at the State K-9 Center. Jack and his team were there for explosives detection trials and, frankly, they were bored. They were SEALs, the elite, and they found the rigid, by-the-book atmosphere of the academy stifling. Jack was leaning against a truck, radiating an aura of confident, near-arrogant detachment, when he saw her. She paid no attention to the SEALs. She was in the middle of a dusty training field, working with a magnificent German Shepherd. Her focus was absolute, her voice crisp and clear, her movements precise. She was running the dog through a series of complex scent tests, and there was a synergy between them that fascinated him. It wasn't just handler and animal. It was a partnership. Later, he saw her sitting alone at the edge of the mess hall, away from the loud tables of cops and SEALs. Rocco was at her feet, perfectly behaved. Jack, on an impulse he didn't fully understand, broke away from his team and walked over. That's a serious piece of gear you got there, he said, nodding at the dog. Maya looked up. Her eyes were wary. She was used to men trying to chat her up. She wasn't used to them being SEALs. He's not gear, Senior Chief, she replied, her voice polite but firm. He's Officer Rocco and he's my partner. Jack smiled, disarmed. My mistake, Officer Rocco. He indicated the empty chair. Jack Callahan. She hesitated, then nodded. Maya Rosales. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the mess hall fading away. He expected her to be starstruck or at least curious. She was neither. She seemed completely content in her own world. You don't say much, he finally said. Neither do you, she countered. Or so I hear. Ghost, they call you. They say you can sit still for 50 hours waiting for one shot. True enough, he admitted. It's quiet in the scope. The world gets very small. Just me, the wind, and the numbers. Sometimes it's too quiet. She looked at Rocco, stroking his head. I get that. My dad was a cop. He was my whole world. When he died, the world got too loud. Too much noise. Too many people trying to fix me. She looked back at Jack and he saw the deep well of sadness she kept hidden. Rocco, he doesn't try to fix anything. He's just here. His mission is simple. He's loyal. He's constant. I understand that. I trust that. In that moment, Jack had understood. He saw a mirror of his own isolation. He, too, was defined by a solitary mission. He lived by a code that set him apart from the rest of the world. She, in her own way, did the same. They weren't just two service members. They were two lonely souls who had found their anchors in the absolute, unwavering nature of their work. They talked for an hour. He didn't feel the need to be Ghost and she didn't feel the need to be the tough-as-nails cop. They just talked about the quiet, about the noise, about the burden of being the one everyone else counted on. When they left, he felt a pull toward her. He hadn't felt that for anyone in a very long time. He saw her one last time before they both deployed. It was a cool, misty evening. You're headed to Ethelberg, he said. It wasn't a question. And you're headed for high ground, she replied. He wanted to say something profound or romantic, but the words failed him. He was a man of action, not words. Instead, he just looked at her and then at the dog sitting patiently by her side. I'll keep an eye out, he'd said. From up high, I'll watch your sector. It's a promise. Maya had just nodded, understanding the weight in his words. Stay safe, Jack. A mortar round landed on the roof to his left, shattering the memory and throwing him back into the searing heat of the present. The blast threw him to the concrete, shrapnel peppering his vest. He was close. He could hear the fight clearly now, not just as distant cracks, but the distinct heavy thud of the machine gun that was chewing up the officers. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the ringing in his ears. The unfinished skeleton of the construction site loomed before him, a concrete giant against the yellow sky. Grant thought he was breaking rules for a distraction. He was wrong. He was keeping a promise. He sprinted the last 100 yards, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from the run, but from a terrifying, singular focus. He wasn't just saving a police sergeant. He was saving Maya. The construction site was a skeleton. 12 floors of bare concrete and exposed rebar against the hazy yellow sky, a monument to a project abandoned long before the current conflict. It was a perfect sniper's perch and a perfect target. Jack reached the base of the structure, his lungs on fire. The main stairwell was a death trap, too open, too obvious. He scanned the exterior and found what he was looking for. A web of rusted steel scaffolding clung precariously to the side of the building. It would be a brutal climb, but it offered concealment. He slung his rifle, gripped the cold steel, and started up. The climb was agony, his muscles, already strained from the rooftop run, screaming in protest. His gear snagged on stray wires, and the metal rungs were slick with a fine, gritty dust. He forced himself upward, floor after floor, the sounds of the battle growing clearer, echoing in the concrete canyon below. He didn't just hear gunfire, he heard the distinctive heavy thump-thump-thump of a DSHK heavy machine gun, a sound that meant the officers' armored trucks were being chewed to pieces. He reached the 12th floor and rolled onto the unfinished concrete slab, his chest heaving. The wind was stronger up here, whistling through the empty window frames, carrying the smell of burning fuel, cordite, and fear. He crawled on his stomach to the edge overlooking the alley, staying deep in the shadows. He carefully unzipped his drag bag and assembled the M110. The clicks of the rifle locking into place were small, precise sounds in the howling wind, a familiar ritual that momentarily calmed his pounding heart. He extended the bipod and set the rifle on a low concrete barrier. The chaos of the city flooded his scope. The scene below froze his blood. It wasn't a firefight. It was an execution. The kilns was a kill box, just as they'd always feared. The 4 armored trucks were scattered wrecks. The lead vehicle, Maya's, was upside down, burning fiercely. The second was in pieces. The last 2 were crippled, their tires shredded, providing meager cover for the handful of officers still fighting. He counted maybe 6, 7 of them still on their feet, desperately returning fire from behind the smoking vehicle frames. The enemy fighters were not disorganized. They were coordinated, moving in teams, bounding from doorway to doorway, their fire disciplined. Jack spotted their commander, a man in a distinctive red jacket, directing two teams to flank the officer's position. They were tightening the noose, preparing for the final assault. The heavy machine gun on a third-floor balcony was hosing down the length of the alley, suppressing any movement from the cops. "Where is she?" The question screamed in his mind. He forced his breathing to slow, panning the scope past the main fight, scanning the wreckage of the lead truck. "No, please no." Then he found her. She was in the shadow of the overturned truck, a small space shielded from the machine gun by the burning engine block. She wasn't fighting. She was healing. She was kneeling in a widening pool of dark liquid. Her helmet was discarded, her face a mask of frantic, desperate concentration. He zoomed in. She was torn between two bodies. One was a young officer, a kid, a rookie Jack recognized but had never known the name of. The boy was pale, his eyes wide with shock, staring at the catastrophic wound in his leg. Maya was pressing a compress to it, trying to stop a bleed that couldn't be stopped. The other body was Rocco's. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The dog was on his side. A dark, wet patch of fur was matted on his hindquarters. A lucky shot had missed his vital organs, but his flank and hip were shattered. His back legs were useless. Yet, he was not still. Despite the agony, Rocco was on guard. His head was up, pointed down the alley, his ears flat. A low, constant growl rumbled from his chest as he watched the enemy fighters move, his body instinctively trying to shield Maya from the danger he could no longer fight. "Hang on, Rocco," Jack whispered, his voice cracking. "Hang on, boy." Maya's hand slipped, the dressing on the young officer's leg soaking through instantly. She tore it away, tears of pure frustration streaking through the grime on her face, and tried to apply a tourniquet. The boy grabbed her arm. Sarge. Sarge. It's no use." The officer gasped. Save the dog." "Shut up, Evans." Maya yelled, her voice raw. "Nobody dies. Not today." Jack watched, helpless, a mile of air separating them. He felt the cold steel of the rifle stock pressed against his skin. This was his promise. This was his failure. And then he saw it. On a rooftop opposite the alley, a new threat emerged. An insurgent with an RPG crawled into position. He wasn't aiming for the officers still fighting. He was aiming for the burning truck. He was aiming for Maya. He knew the survivors would congregate there. One more rocket would finish them, either from the blast or by cooking off the ammunition still inside the burning truck. The world dissolved. The HVT, Grant, the mission, his career. It all vanished. There was no seal, no objective, no rules. There was just a man, a woman, and the dog standing between her and death. The man in the red jacket was shouting, ordering the RPG gunner to fire. This was not a mission. It was a rescue. Jack's training took over. A cold precision that stood in stark opposition to the fire in his gut. His hands moved on autopilot. Range 950 meters. Wind 7 miles per hour left to right. He clicked the elevation turret. Click, click, click. The sound was as sharp as ice. He shifted his aim from Maya to the rooftop. The RPG gunner shouldered the launcher. Jack centered the crosshairs on the man's chest. He breathed out halfway and held. His world shrunk to the single, clear image in his scope. His finger took up the slack on the trigger. Jack's finger squeezed the trigger. The M110 bucked against his shoulder, a familiar, solid punch. The sound of the suppressed shot was a low, heavy thump, instantly swallowed by the wind. For the 1.2 seconds it took the bullet to travel 950 meters, the world was silent. Down in the alley, Maya braced for the backblast of the RPG, shielding Evans with her own body. The rocket never came. On the rooftop across the street, the insurgent with the rocket launcher simply collapsed. He didn't scream. He didn't fall. His body just went limp, folding over the parapet wall as if his strings had been cut. The launcher clattered harmlessly onto the roof. The insurgent commander, the man in the red jacket who had been watching his man take aim, froze. He looked up, his expression of triumph turning to stunned disbelief. He scanned the wrong buildings, his head whipping back and forth, trying to find the source of an impossible shot. Jack wasn't watching him. He was already moving. He had no time to admire his work. The RPG was a threat, but the DSHK heavy machine gun was the problem. It was the linchpin of the ambush, the weapon that was pinning Maya's people down and turning their trucks into coffins. His scope swung left, finding the third-floor balcony. The gunner, a large man with a thick beard, had stopped firing, confused by the sudden silence from his RPG team. He was peering out over his gun shield, trying to see what his commander was yelling about. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Thump. Jack's rifle barked again. The 7.62 by 51 round crossed the alley and slammed into the gunner's upper chest, punching through his vest and throwing him backward, away from the weapon. The second man in the gun team, the loader, stared at his fallen comrade for one stupid second. Thump. Jack's second shot was already on its way. The loader crumpled. The DSHK fell silent. In the alley, the change was instantaneous. It was as if a hurricane had just broken. The oppressive, overwhelming thump 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 that had been rattling their teeth and tearing apart their cover was gone. Maya, her hands slick with Private Evans's blood, finally cinched the tourniquet tight. She looked up, her heart pounding. What happened? She gasped. Where's the heavy? Sarge. Look. Another officer, a corporal named Diaz, yelled from behind the next truck. He was pointing at the flankers. Maya risked a glance around the edge of her burning truck. The two teams of fighters who had been methodically advancing on their position had stopped. They were exposed, standing in the middle of the street, looking up at the machine gun balcony. They were confused, leaderless. Now, Jack thought. He was no longer reacting. He was hunting. This is what the M110 was built for. Not just accuracy, but speed. This was the moment that separated a bolt-action rifle from a semi-automatic. He didn't have to break his sight picture. He didn't have to chamber another round. He just had to find the next target. His crosshairs settled on the first exposed fighter. Thump. The man dropped. He traversed 2 feet to the right. The next fighter. Thump. A third realized what was happening and turned to run. Thump. A fourth dove for cover, but he was too slow. Thump. In less than 5 seconds, an entire fire team was erased from the battlefield. Below, it was a miracle. Maya watched, her mouth open. Men were just falling. There was no sound of a helicopter. It wasn't SWAT. The shots were coming from somewhere high, somewhere impossible. There was a single, powerful booming echo that arrived a split second after the impacts. It was a sniper. A friendly sniper. We've got support. Maya's voice, raw from smoke and shouting, rang through the alley. It was no longer the voice of desperation. It was a command. We've got an angel. Diaz, get up. Return fire. Pouncey, cover east. Don't let them regroup. Hope, more potent than any adrenaline, surged through her. She looked at Evans, who was pale but conscious. You're gonna live, officer. Then she looked at Rocco. The dog was still low, still growling, his dark eyes fixed on the alley. We're all gonna live, boy. She grabbed her M4 rifle, chambered a round, and braced her good shoulder against the chassis of the truck. She was a cop again. Jack watched her move. A fierce, protective pride welled in his chest, but he suppressed it. The job wasn't done. The commander in the red jacket was not stupid. He had recovered from his shock and was now screaming at his remaining men, pointing frantically. He was pointing at the construction site. He was pointing at Jack. You're smart, Jack thought. But you're too late. Jack put the crosshairs on center mass. This was the most important shot. Not a kill shot, but a command shot. He aimed for the man's chest, right where his radio handset was clipped. Thump. The commander was thrown backward as if hit by a truck. He wasn't dead, but his entire command and control capability was shattered along with his ribcage. The enemy fighters, who moments before had been on the verge of overrunning the cops, were now in complete disarray. The disciplined attack disintegrated into a panicked rout. Fighters scrambled over each other trying to get out of the alley, away from the invisible hand of judgment that was plucking them off the ground one by one. Jack stayed on the rifle, his eye never leaving the scope. He methodically tracked the retreating figures, taking a shot at anyone who slowed to aim. The rain of steel was precise, cold, and relentless. He felt a detached calm, a sense of pure, lethal purpose. But deep inside, with every squeeze of the trigger, his mind formed the words, I am. A fighter at the mouth of the alley dropped. Keeping. A man who tried to drag the DSHK back inside was hit. My promise. The last one to take aim at Maya's position crumpled. A sudden, deafening silence fell over the kilns, broken only by the crackle of the burning truck and the fading shouts of the retreating enemy. Maya slowly stood up, rifle at the ready. She looked at Diaz, who was staring at her, his eyes wide. Sarge, what the hell just happened? Maya didn't answer. She just looked up at the empty sky, toward the concrete skeleton where the sun was beginning to set and whispered, thank you. The silence that fell over the kilns was more terrifying than the noise. It was a ringing void, heavy with the smell of sulfur and burning fuel. Jack remained motionless, his eyes still pressed to the scope. The immediate threat was gone, but the fight wasn't over. Victory was measured in seconds, and he knew the enemy, though broken, was not gone. They were rats in a maze, and rats, when cornered, would always turn and bite. He scanned the alley. The rout was real. Most of the fighters had vanished into the urban sprawl, but not all of them. He spotted movement in a bombed-out doorway 200 meters from Maya. A small group, maybe 4 or 5, had taken cover. They weren't running. They were watching. They were looking up. They were trying to find the angel who had just decimated their ranks. "You're learning," Jack whispered. But they were looking at the wrong buildings, scanning the rooftops on the opposite side of the alley. He was safe for the moment, but he couldn't stay on the 12th floor. His position was compromised, and it was only a matter of time before one of them got lucky. Below, Maya felt the silence like a physical blow. The sudden absence of the DSHK sledgehammer impacts made her dizzy. "Diaz," she yelled, her voice cracking. "Pouncey, report." "Here, Sarge." Corporal Diaz, a wiry Marine who was all perpetual motion, poked his head out from behind the rear truck. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Good, Pouncey," a broad-shouldered corporal who was the rock of the team, answered from the same truck. "We're good." "Evans." Maya turned. The young private was breathing, his eyes squeezed shut in pain, but the tourniquet she'd applied was holding. The bleeding had slowed. "Sarge." "Rocco." Evans gasped, nodding toward the dog. Maya's heart seized. She crawled to where Rocco lay. He was panting, his breath shallow and fast. His dark eyes, normally so bright and intelligent, were now glazed with pain. He gave a low whine as she tried to lift his head, his tail giving a single, weak thump against the blood-soaked concrete. "I see you, boy," she whispered, her hand finding his head, stroking the soft fur behind his ears. "I see you. You did good. You did so good." She looked at the wound. It was bad. Shrapnel had torn through his hip and flank. He was bleeding heavily. He needed a surgeon, not a field dressing. "Sarge, we gotta move," Diaz yelled, his voice rising with panic. "We can't stay in the open. They'll be back." Maya's training kicked back in. Diaz was right. They were sitting ducks. "The shop," she yelled, pointing at a small, collapsed storefront just 10 meters away. It looked like an old tailor shop, its windows blown out, its interior a dark shadow. It was cover. "Diaz, Pouncey, covering fire. I'll get Evans." Diaz and Pouncey opened up. Their M4s echoed in the alley, the sound loud and defiant. Maya turned to Evans. "All right, officer, up you go, arm around my neck. Let's go." With a pained groan, the private struggled to his feet, leaning his full weight on her. Maya half dragged, half carried him, stumbling the 10 meters across the open ground. The world spun. Her own shoulder, the one she'd injured in the crash, screamed in protest, but she ignored it. They tumbled through the shattered doorway, falling into the dusty darkness of the shop. "Diaz," she yelled. "Your turn. Get in here." Diaz sprinted across the gap and dove into the shop. "Pouncey, go, I'm covering," Pouncey yelled back, firing a 3-round burst at a window where he'd seen movement. Maya's blood ran cold. "Pouncey, get in here now. That's an order." She looked back. Pouncey was providing cover, but she had to go back. "Rocco," she whispered. "I'm coming back for Rocco." She ran back out into the kill zone. The dog was where she'd left him, a 90-pound mass of wounded, loyal muscle. "Okay, boy," she grunted, grabbing his harness. "Come on," she pulled. He cried out in pain, and she stopped, tears welling. I'm sorry, but I'm not leaving you." She tried again, pulling him by his front legs, dragging his dead weight. It was like pulling a boulder. "Sarge!" Diaz yelled, running back out to her. "I got him." Diaz grabbed Rocco's harness, and together they lifted. It was in that moment of terrible exposure that the enemy opened up again. The remaining fighters had pinpointed their movement. Bullets zipped past them, chipping the concrete where they'd been standing seconds before. High above, Jack saw it happen. He saw Maya run back out. No. "Get back," he gasped. When the enemy fire erupted, his detachment shattered. He saw the bullets kicking up dust around her feet. He let out a roar no one could hear, and his rifle was back on his shoulder. He wasn't aiming for center mass. He was aiming to suppress. Thump, thump, thump. He fired 3 rounds as fast as he could into the doorway the enemy was firing from. The shots were a warning, a terrifying statement. The enemy fire stopped instantly as they dove for cover, unwilling to challenge the ghost again. "He's still there," Maya whispered, realizing the gunfire had been answered. She and Diaz gave one last heave and pulled Rocco inside the shop. Pouncey sprinted from the truck and dove in after them just as a new, more terrifying sound began. Ping! A round hit the scaffolding near Jack's head. The sound was a high-pitched metallic shriek. They'd found him. A second round zipped past his ear, close enough that he felt the air move. "Time to go," he muttered. He folded the bipod, grabbed the rifle, and started to move. He couldn't take the stairs. He had to go down the scaffolding, a 12-story descent, completely exposed. He swung his legs over the edge and onto the steel frame, his back to the building, rifle slung. He moved fast, hand over hand, foot over foot. Ping! Another round hit the steel 3 feet from him, vibrating the entire structure. He was a target on a jungle gym. Inside the shop, Maya ignored the battle. It smelled of old fabric, spice, and concrete dust. She settled Evans against the far wall. Then she knelt beside Rocco. The dog was fading. His breathing was shallow. He whimpered, a low, heartbreaking sound. She tore open a fresh bandage and pressed it hard against the wound in his hip. He cried out, a sharp yelp of pain, and she flinched. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. She bent low, resting her forehead against his. You have to hang on. Do you hear me? You hung on for me. You took that shrapnel for me. Now you have to hang on a little longer. Don't you leave me. Don't you dare leave me. I can't. I can't lose you too. Just stay. Stay with me, boy, please. Jack was on the 6th floor when he heard it. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a deep, rhythmic vibration in the air. Whump, whump, whump. He paused, hanging from the steel, and looked west. 2 Black Hawk helicopters, the Quick Reaction Force, were banking over the rooftops, their noses dipped, moving fast. Below them, he saw the blocky shapes of armored MAT trucks racing down the main boulevard. The cavalry had arrived. The remaining enemy fighters saw them too. They made one last desperate effort, rising from cover to spray the shop with automatic fire before they fled. Jack paused his descent. He unslung his rifle, braced it against a crossbar, and took aim. It was a difficult, unstable shot. Thump! The lead fighter dropped. The rest vanished. He watched for another second as the MAT screeched to a halt at the head of the alley. Marines poured out, establishing a secure perimeter. The Black Hawk circled overhead, their miniguns spinning, daring anyone to move. Maya was safe. Jack didn't wait. He didn't watch. He was a ghost. He slung his rifle and continued his descent, dropping the last 10 feet into a pile of rubble at the base of the building. He melted into the shadows of a side street just as the first QRF medics reached Maya's shop. Maya heard American voices. In here. We're in here. Wounded. A young corpsman slid into the shop. His face was a picture of professional calm. I got you, Sergeant. Maya nodded, her hand still pressed tight against Rocco's wound. She looked out the shattered doorway, past the friendly vehicles, and up at the tall concrete skeleton high above. It was empty, silhouetted against the twilight sky. Her angel was gone. Jack didn't run. He moved with a deliberate, lethal economy, a ghost in the alleyways of a city that had just been his hunting ground. He skirted the lights and noise of the arriving Quick Reaction Force, circling the perimeter of the battle and taking the long way back. The sun was a smear of orange and purple, bleeding into the hazy dusk, and the first chill of the desert night was setting in. The adrenaline from the firefight had vanished, leaving behind the cold, metallic taste of certainty. He knew what was coming. He took the old service ladder back up the communications tower, his original position. The climb was slower this time, his muscles heavy, his mind processing the consequences. He reached the nest. Cody Echo Evans was still there, but he wasn't looking through his scope. He was sitting with his back against the concrete wall, knees drawn up, his face pale in the growing darkness. You're back, Evans whispered, his voice unsteady. Jack just nodded, beginning the methodical process of cleaning his rifle. He's gone, Jack, Evans said, his voice cracking. The HVT, he walked right out the front door. Clean as you please. 10 minutes after the shooting started. Got in a car and just drove away. Evans looked at his hands. I lied for you. I told Grant the wind had kicked up. That visibility was obscured by the smoke. I tried, man. But he knows. I know, Jack said, his voice quiet. He finished packing his gear, making everything look exactly as it should. Grant was on the net every 2 minutes, Evans said, getting to his feet, his fear turning to a simmering anger. He wasn't yelling. It was worse. He was cold. As if summoned, the radio on Jack's vest crackled. He hadn't even plugged it back in. He slowly reconnected the jack to his headset, the click loud in the sudden silence. Ghost. The voice was flat, without inflection. It was Sack Grant. Report to the TOC immediately. The channel went dead. Jack shouldered his pack. You did your job, Cody. Tell the truth. I'm good from here. He left his spotter on the tower and started down. The walk through the forward operating base was surreal. The base was buzzing. The QRF was back, and the rescued police officers were being processed at the aid station. The story had already spread like wildfire. A ghost sniper, a guardian angel, had single-handedly broken a company-sized ambush, saving an entire squad. The officers he passed were clapping each other on the back, celebrating a rare, clean victory. Jack walked through the middle of it, a ghost at his own party, his stomach a knot of ice. He reached the Tactical Operations Center, a cold, windowless bunker humming with servers and quiet, professional voices. A young intel analyst pointed to a closed door at the back. He's waiting for you, Senior Chief. Jack knocked once and entered. Sack Grant was not what most people expected. He was a man in his late 40s, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and prematurely graying hair. He looked more like a history professor than a SEAL commander, which only made his reputation for cold, calculated strategy more intimidating. He was standing in front of a massive digital map of Ethelberg, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn around. Report, Senior Chief Callahan, Grant said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the small, dark room. Sir, Jack began, his voice a practiced monotone. My primary comms went down, suspected electronic interference from the IED blast. I lost signal with echo and... Stop. Grant's voice cut him off, sharp and final. He turned slowly. His eyes weren't angry. They were worse. They were filled with a deep, penetrating disappointment that was more devastating than any rage. Don't you lie to me, not you. He let the silence hang in the space, a suffocating weight. Do you know what trust is, Senior Chief? Grant asked, his voice deceptively soft. It's the single foundational element of special operations. It's the belief that the man on your flank will hold his position. It's the belief that the man watching your back from 1,000 meters will do his job. He walked to his desk and tapped a file. While you were offline, our primary target, a man this task force has spent 6 months and millions of dollars to locate, walked out of his apartment, got into a Toyota Hilux, and vanished. The entire objective of this deployment has failed. It failed because my best operator, the one man I trusted to separate the mission from the noise, abandoned his post. Jack stood at attention. The lie was useless. Sir, I was monitoring the police emergency net. The convoy was K92. They were being overrun. The SWAT was 20 minutes out. They were being annihilated. SWAT is my asset to deploy, not yours, Grant snapped, his voice finally breaking with cold anger. Your target was the HVT. You had one job. You were not ordered to monitor the police net. You were not ordered to provide support. You were ordered to watch that building. They didn't have 20 minutes, sir, Jack said, his voice level, respectful but unmoving. I heard the transmissions. They were down to their last magazines. Command structure was gone. Multiple critical injuries. The enemy was massing for a final assault. It was a tactical certainty that the position would be overrun and destroyed. Grant stared at him. So you made a decision. You abandoned a theater-level strategic objective to save a police patrol. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Or was it just one officer, Senior Chief? Sergeant Maya Rosales? I've read your file. I've read hers. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've jeopardized this entire operation? You let a mass-murdering bomber walk because of her? The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Jack met his commander's gaze. Sir, I did it because they were American forces, pinned down and facing certain death, and I was the only asset in the entire city who could intervene. My assessment was that allowing them to be slaughtered while I had the means to prevent it was an unacceptable failure. Grant stared at him for a long, heavy moment, searching his face. Unacceptable? Grant repeated, the word tasting like acid. You are deciding what's unacceptable. You are substituting your feelings for my orders. You are breaking your oath. He turned his back on Jack, looking again at the map. I put you up there because you're the best, because you are, or were, a professional. I trusted you to be the one man who could see the whole board, who understood that sometimes to win the war, You have to accept losing a battle. He sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion and disappointment. I cannot run a task force on unacceptable feelings. I cannot have operators picking and choosing their orders based on who is screaming on the radio. He faced Jack one last time, his expression now cold, his decision made. Trust is the only currency we have, Jack. You just made us bankrupt. You are confined to this base. Petty Officer Evans is being reassigned, effective immediately. He's lucky that's all he's getting. Grant picked up his phone. This conversation is over. You can prepare your testimony for the preliminary hearing. You, Senior Chief Callahan, are facing a general court-martial for dereliction of duty and direct violation of a lawful order. He looked away. Dismissed. For 2 days, Jack lived in a gray limbo. He was confined to his small, featureless room on the base, a prisoner of his own actions. The silence was absolute. He had no duties, no contact with the outside world, and no news. Echo had been reassigned, gone from the base within hours. A ghost. Jack was alone, left to dissect the single, adrenaline-fueled decision that had cost him his career, his honor, and had let a monster escape. He methodically cleaned his rifle, not because it was dirty, but because the ritual of it, the smell of the oil, the cold click of the metal, was the only thing that made sense. On the third morning, there was a sharp, impersonal knock on the door. A young police runner stood in the doorway, not daring to meet his eyes. Senior Chief Callahan, Commander Grant wants to see you in the TOC, immediately. The walk back to the Tactical Operations Center felt different. The base was no longer celebrating. The reality of the escaped HVT had settled over the compound like a shroud. The few operators he saw passed him with their eyes straight ahead, offering neither condemnation nor support. He was an outcast. He had broken the trust. He stepped into the cold, conditioned air of the TOC. SAC Grant was standing in the exact same spot, his back to the door, staring at the digital map of Asher. But he wasn't alone. In the corner, standing at a rigid parade rest, was Sergeant Maya Rosales. Jack's breath caught, his professional mask nearly shattering. Her left arm was in a sling, her hand wrapped in a thick white dressing. A dark, ugly bruise covered her temple and cheekbone, but her eyes were clear, fierce, and locked on him. She looked exhausted, but she was alive. She was here. Senior Chief, Grant said, his voice flat. He didn't turn around. Are you familiar with the after-action reporting process? Yes, sir, Jack said, his voice husky. I have 2 reports on my desk regarding the ambush in the kilns. Grant finally turned, his face an unreadable mask. He tapped a thick file. The first is from the SWAT commander, Captain Ferris. He describes the scene as a classic kill zone, one from which no one should have survived. Thompson picked up the report. Captain Ferris notes that his forces found 19 enemy combatants neutralized, all by a large-caliber precision weapon. He notes that the unknown shooter prioritized heavy weapons, command elements, and flanking routes in a sequence he describes as a doctrinal masterpiece of Overwatch support. He states, unequivocally, that this sniper did the QRF's job for them. He wants to know who this shooter is because he wants to buy him a beer. Jack remained silent. But that is just a tactical assessment, Thompson continued, his voice quieter. He tapped a thinner file. This report is the official debrief from the survivors. Corporal Diaz, Corporal Pouncey, and Private Evans, and Sergeant Rosales. He looked at Maya and then back at Jack. They, on the other hand, do not use terms like doctrinal. Their descriptions are more colorful. They all refer to the shooter as their guardian angel. They all testify without deviation that they were less than a minute from being completely overrun. They were on their last magazines. Private Evans was bleeding out. Sergeant Rosales was exposed. Grant walked around the desk until he stood directly in front of Jack. They are all unanimous in their testimony. Without the intervention of this angel, they would all be dead. All of them. 7 police officers, 7 families, 7 lives, all saved by a shooter who was not supposed to be there. Maya took a half step forward, her good hand clenched into a fist. Sir, Grant held up a hand, silencing her. Sergeant, I appreciate your presence, but I will handle this. Sir, Maya said, disobeying his implied order. Private Evans is alive. He's going to keep his leg. The medic said 30 more seconds and the tourniquet wouldn't have mattered. She looked at Jack, her eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering loyalty that defied the sterile coldness of the room. Jack, they're alive. Grant's jaw tightened. He knew. Thank you, Sergeant. Wait outside. Maya held her ground for another second, a silent message of support passing between her and Jack. Then she gave a sharp nod and left the room. The door closed, leaving the two men in a heavy silence. She knows, Grant said quietly. Captain Ferris suspects. And I know you had a direct, lawful order for me to maintain your position. You violated that order. You allowed a strategic target, a man responsible for the deaths of hundreds, to escape. I cannot and will not overlook that. By every regulation in the UCMJ, I should be processing your court-martial paperwork right now. Jack met his commander's gaze. I understand, sir. Do you? Thompson suddenly slammed his open palm down on the desk, the sound making Jack flinch. Do you understand this? 7 police officers are eating in the mess hall right now who should be in body bags. You broke the rules, but you fulfilled the intent. You failed my mission, but you saved the force. You broke faith with me, but you kept a promise to them. The commander, the warden, a man made of cold logic, looked completely lost. He rubbed his face, pushing his glasses up onto his forehead. I have a paradox, Senior Chief. By the book, I have to end your career. By my conscience, I have to recommend you for the Silver Star. You have created an impossible situation and I don't know what to do. Jack stood there, the two opposing fates hanging in the balance. He thought of the HVT, a failure that would haunt him. He thought of Maya's bruised face. Then he asked the only question that really mattered. What about the dog, sir? Thompson blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. The K-9? Officer Rocco, Jack said, his voice quiet, but it was the first real human emotion he had allowed to show. Is he alive? Grant, momentarily flustered, looked down at his desk, shuffling through the files. He found the casualty report. Officer Rocco, status critical. He was medically evacuated with the other wounded. The vet, a Major Chen, operated. He was in surgery for 6 hours. He's in the recovery ward. Prognosis is listed as guarded. Jack nodded once. Permission to be dismissed, sir? Thompson stared at him. Jack wasn't asking about the court-martial. He wasn't asking about the medal. He was asking about a dog. In that moment, Grant's expression softened for a fraction of a second, as if he finally understood the why that had been eluding him. The charges are pending. The recommendation is also pending. He waved a hand. Get out of my office, Callahan. Jack didn't go back to his room. He walked past the barracks, past the mess hall to the small, sterile clinic near the landing zone, a place he'd never had a reason to visit. He pushed through the door. The smell of antiseptic and surgical soap hit him. It was silent, but for the hum of a generator. Maya was there. She was sitting on a low metal stool, her back to the door. She was next to a large, steel recovery kennel. Her good hand was threaded through the bars, resting on a patch of dark fur. Jack walked over and stood beside her. He said nothing, just looked. Inside, Rocco lay on a blue blanket. His entire left side was shaved. A complex, angry map of black stitches and surgical staples closed a wound that ran from his hip to his flank. An 4-line was taped to his forehead. He looked small, broken, and impossibly still. He hasn't woken up since the surgery, Maya whispered. She didn't have to look up to know it was him. Major Chen, she's the vet. She said the shrapnel missed his spine by less than a centimeter. She said he's strong. She did everything she could. Jack just watched, his heart a cold knot. He'd saved the officers. But had he been too late for this one loyal soldier? They told me, Maya said, her voice thick, about the HVT, about what you gave up. They told me what you're facing. She finally turned, her bruised face tilted up to his, her eyes swimming with a grief and a gratitude so profound there was no room for words. Why, Jack? You knew what it would cost. Jack looked from her torn, beautiful face to the still, broken dog. I made a promise, he said, his voice hoarse. To watch over you both. Maya let out a shaky breath and rested her head against his side, her shoulders shaking. He put his hand on her hair. They stood in silence, two warriors in a cold, sterile room, surrounded by the cost of their lives. And then, under Maya's hand, a single black ear twitched. A low, sleepy, drug-filled groan rumbled in the dog's chest. Rocco's eyes, cloudy and unfocused, blinked open. They blinked, trying to make sense of the light. Then they found Maya. A small, weak thump-thump came from inside the kennel. His tail. He was trying to wag his tail. Maya let out a choked sob, a sound of broken relief, and slid off the stool onto her knees, pressing her face against the cold steel bars. Hey, boy, she cried, her voice cracking. Hey, sleepyhead. I'm here. I'm right here. Jack knelt beside her. He reached his own hand through the bars, past Maya's, and laid it on Rocco's broad, warm head. The dog leaned into the touch, letting out a soft sigh. The court-martial didn't matter. The medal didn't matter. In that small, quiet room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic, life and love and loyalty had won. That was the only verdict. That was the only reward.